Del Toro set the standard for adapting Hellboy for the big screen, then Neil Marshall set the standard for tricking edgelord nerds out of their money. Hello and welcome to Not So Super Movie Reviews. My name is Kenny, and on this channel we only review superhero movies or movies that are based on comic books and have a Rotten Tomatoes score of 65% or less. Today's movie is going to be Hellboy, coming in at around an 18% critic review and a 56% user review, which is probably one of the largest gaps so far that we've done. 56 is a significantly different opinion than 18. So let's get into where I stand on that and some of the specifics as to why. First, let's talk about what worked about this movie, because I think the users were right in saying that there is something that works about this movie. The first thing that comes to mind is David Harbour. Perlman left some really big shoes to fill, and I actually watched the first Hellboy movie right before I watched this one just to refresh my memory because it's been a while, and I didn't miss Perlman. David Harbour is just so good for this role that you believe it right off the bat. Not only that, but I will say that the writing for Hellboy's character this time around definitely paints him as more of a teenager. You know, the idea is that Hellboy ages really slowly, but so does his maturity level. So yeah, he may be 90 years old or whatever, but he's really still just a teenage demon, essentially, in an adult demon's body. And I feel like the Del Toro movies, it kind of shifted between making him a little bit childish and a really adult, whereas these movies I feel did a much better job of making him like a older teenager, like a 16, 17-year-old. And it definitely works in this movie. I have just zero problems with this Hellboy, with this adaptation of the character. You know, the second thing that worked about this movie, and you have to mention it, it's the fight scenes, okay? Because, or maybe just action scenes. You know, there are lots of action scenes in this movie, and they're not all great, but the ones that are good are fantastic. The one that's coming to my mind, like right off the bat, is he's fighting these three giants in the countryside, and just the visuals of him, you know, tricking the giant into cutting one of the other one's head off, and all the CGI that's involved with that, as well as the camera work that they had to factor into all this CGI, is just awesome. And the metal backing track to some of this is really fitting and was really a lot of fun. You know, unfortunately, that's where we're going to have to stop on things that worked. So let's talk about what didn't work. And we do have a few things to discuss. The first thing in this, you know, my first thing is always somewhat of a nitpicky thing. This wouldn't have been a movie ruiner to me if my second and third points were answered, which they weren't. But my first point is the overuse of gore. Okay, now I'm not huge into horror films. I've never, to my knowledge, seen a Neil Marshall film, who I believe is a horror director. So I'm not always crazy about any gore, to be honest, but my thought process has always been, as long as it serves the narrative and it serves the story, and it becomes, it's not forced. And there are moments in this movie where it is 100% forced. There's a notable scene towards the end of the movie where the gates to hell open up and these like eldritch creatures come out, and just the things that they're doing to just people on the streets of London are just excessively gory. The portal gets closed 5 minutes later. The main characters don't even know that it happened, really. It's just there. And there's a lot of those moments where you're like, okay, maybe we didn't need that much blood. And that's in contrast to the Del Toro movies, which were dark, but also PG-13 to my recollection. There was no real blood, even when there actually should have been blood. So they're kind of on both ends of the spectrum. This one just goes a little over the top. Alright, my second thing with this movie is that one of the strengths I feel of Hellboy as a property is not just Hellboy, but his sidekicks, okay? These other paranormal investigators that come along. You know, the original movies brought us Liz Sherman, the pyrokinetic, the Abe Sapien, who was just an amazing character, all around, just really interesting characters. And you have to say something about Guillermo del Toro's style that he puts into his movies, that even if the story's not as good, you just love watching them because there's so much unique things going on, and there's always something interesting to look at. This movie really had a lot going on, but for the characters, your side characters, you get this like jaguar werewolf guy and this clairvoyant Alice. They're really not nearly as strong as Liz Sherman and Abe Sapien were in the original movies at all. And, furthermore, they're not fleshed out. They're just shoved into the story, which we'll get into that. But, they meet them 40 minutes into this movie. There's no backstory put with them. They're just sort of added to the story, and you could tell the same story if you took them out. They're there for some key random moments, and that's pretty much it. So even though they nailed Hellboy, the other side characters, just not so much. So the third issue I have with this movie, and this is just the undeniable black cloud over this movie, it's the choppy storytelling. So much is going on. They're throwing so much high fantasy stuff at you constantly. I mean, they're flooding you with these concepts and characters and situations, and you don't really get a chance to flesh any of them out. I mean, the whole story of this movie is so unfocused. It almost feels like you're listening to like a 7-year-old recount a story, and they're like, okay, and then he went to the store, and then he got in a fight with a pigeon, and then we went to, and it feels like that. It feels like, okay, Hellboy goes to England, and then he's trying to help this giant hunters club, but then they betray him, and then he gets knocked out. But then when he wakes up, the giants have killed them, and he fights the giants, and then it's all these and then moments. Watching the movie, it's not 100% clear what they want you to focus on. The villain is so forgettable. It's Nimue, this witch, and then there's the subplot of him being of Arthur's bloodline, and then there's the further subplot of him, if he takes Excalibur, he becomes the Demon King, and his destiny is to destroy Earth, and any one of those things could have been fleshed out into an amazing story. Unfortunately, our directors and writers decided on all of them, and it's the bane of this movie. Alright, so before we get into my final score, let's talk about the hardest moment to watch. Now, there was one scene that really stuck out to me as I was watching the movie, which is when he kisses Baba Yaga, who's the boogie woman. And I know what you're thinking, that also happens in this movie? Yes. They take everything that didn't happen from the comics in the Del Toro movies, and he just makes everything else happen in this movie. But yeah, he kisses Baba Yaga, who, again, this is a movie with a ton of horror elements. She is not a looker, and it is disgusting. But that's going to be a runner-up, because the whole point of that scene is to make you uncomfortable and to be hard to watch. And I think the spirit of this segment is to pick the moment that's hard to watch because it's bad, and you wish that the people making it would have had some self-awareness. So instead, the winning scene is actually at the very end. His clairvoyant friend Alice, who's a psychic, she can also speak to the dead. She has this disgusting ability to touch a dead person and make like a flesh ghost, like kind of come out of her mouth, which is like, it looks like her insides are coming out, and then their insides just have the face of the dead person. And at the very end of the movie, Nimue kills his father, and to snap him out of it, Alice gets him to come out as a flesh ghost and talk to Hellboy. That's not the hardest scene to watch. The hardest part is what comes after. So he defeats Nimue, he puts the sword back, he says, I'm not going to be the Demon King, even though lots of people just died in a really terrible way. And then he has this whole I'm proud of you speech with this disgusting flesh ghost father with a terribly CGI'd face. And it's just, I was honestly laughing when I was watching that scene because it totally undercuts. I don't even remember what they were saying. I just remember it was like, I'm proud of you, son. But for the most part, I don't even remember what happened. You're just like, this is gross and so weird, like off-putting. Alright, so as for my final score, you know, there's enough going on with this movie that I just can't agree with the critics. I mean, 18% is definitely too harsh. But on the other hand of it, they didn't try hard enough to make this a good comic book movie, which Hellboy has a lot of horror elements, so at the end of the day, it's a graphic novel. And this movie doesn't try to be that at all. It tries to be kind of whatever Neil Marshall wanted to make, and then he had to put these characters in it. And it definitely feels that way, and it definitely suffers from that. So it also doesn't deserve, at least for me, a 56%. So I'm going to just have to give it a juicy 40%. It's watchable. If you're a fan of Hellboy, I recommend you buy it. It is out today on DVD and for rent. Otherwise, let's go ahead and skip this. Alright, now it's time for a new-ish segment, second time I'm doing it, called The Bad Line Lightning Round. Let's do it. It's Miller time. Revenge is the only sustenance I require. Guten Tag. They've replaced swords with singing competitions. It's not personal, it's just maths. You're the guy that's gonna bring about the end of the world? Get over yourself. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching, for going on this adventure into the mythos of bad movies with me. If you enjoyed this video, check out my video from last week, which was on the 2015 Fantastic Four. I also got a whole bunch of other videos. I come out with a new video every week, so if you liked it, like it. If you want to see those new videos, subscribe. And I didn't want to say it, but you can join the notification squad if that's what you're into by clicking that little bell icon. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and yeah, we'll see you around.